Just ignore him. He doesn't know what he's talking about." The words came out of Vanessa's mouth like they cost her nothing. The doctor, a young resident with tired eyes and a clipboard he hadn't looked up from in 10 minutes, glanced at me for half a second, long enough to see an old man in a windbreaker sitting in a plastic chair, hands folded, saying nothing, and then looked back at her, like she'd just confirmed something he already suspected. The fluorescent light above us buzzed. Somewhere down the hall, a cart with a bad wheel squeaked past. My grandson, Eli, 6 years old, sat on the exam table with an IV taped to the back of his small hand, swinging his sneakers because they didn't touch the floor. I didn't say anything. I never do, in those first few seconds. I've learned that silence tells you more about a room than talking ever will. What none of them knew, not the doctor, not Vanessa, not even my own son sitting slumped by the window with his phone in his lap like it was the only thing holding him up, was that every single bill from that hospital, going back 14 months, had my name on the account. Not theirs. Mine. But that part of the story starts 3 months earlier, back when nobody in that family had the first idea where the money was really coming from. My name is Walter Cobb. Everybody who's known me longer than a week just calls me Walt. I'm 69 years old, and for 31 years I made my living as a lineman for the county power co-op outside a town in eastern Tennessee called Sabertooth Ridge. Population 1,400, 1 traffic light, a Dollar General, and a diner that's been serving the same meatloaf special since before I was born there. I climbed poles in ice storms. I've been struck by lightning once, sideways off a transformer, and lived to tell it, though I don't tell it much. My wife, Loretta, passed 11 years ago from a heart that just quit on her one Tuesday morning while she was watering her tomato plants. I found her there, kneeling in the dirt, like she'd just decided to rest a while. We had one son, Danny. He's 38 now, works in insurance underwriting 2 counties over, married a woman named Vanessa, 9 years ago, at a courthouse ceremony I wasn't invited to until 4 days beforehand. I went anyway. You don't miss your only child's wedding over hurt feelings, even the kind that sit in your chest for years afterward, like a splinter you can't quite dig out. Vanessa is smart. I want to say that plainly, up front, because this isn't a story about a villain. She graduated top of her class from a business program in Knoxville. She runs the household books like a hawk, and she loves my grandson fiercely, in her own particular way. The way some people love things by trying to control every variable around them so nothing bad can happen. I understand that instinct better than most people would guess. I raised a son alone for 11 years after Loretta died. I know what it is to hold on too tight, because you're terrified of what happens if you let go. What Vanessa never understood about me, though, was that quiet doesn't mean stupid, and humble doesn't mean harmless. Eli was born with a congenital heart defect. They caught it at the 20-week ultrasound. A hole between 2 chambers that the doctors said might close on its own, might not, might need surgery before he was 2. It didn't close. He had his first open-heart surgery at 14 months, a second one last spring, and now, at 6, he was back in and out of the cardiology wing every few weeks for monitoring, medication adjustments, the occasional emergency scare that would send Danny's truck flying down Route 11 at 11 o'clock at night. The bills, even with insurance, were the kind of numbers that don't look real when you first see them typed on a page. Danny's insurance covered maybe 60%, and even that 60% left them owing more some months than Danny brought home in 2 paychecks. I found out how bad it was by accident. I'd stopped by their place, a rented duplex on the edge of town, to drop off a mess of squash from my garden, and I saw an envelope from the hospital sitting on the kitchen counter, already opened, with a red stamp on it that said, "Past due, final notice." Danny came around the corner fast when he saw me looking at it and swept it into a drawer like it was something shameful. "That's nothing, Dad," he said. "We're handling it." I didn't push. That's not how Danny and I talk to each other. We never have been the kind of father and son who sit down and say the hard things straight out. That's one of my failures, and I own it, and it's part of why this whole story unfolded the way it did. When Loretta was alive, she was the translator between us. She'd hear something Danny wouldn't say to me directly and she'd carry it over, softened, and hear something I couldn't say to him and carry that back too. When she died, that bridge went with her, and Danny and I have mostly been two men standing on opposite banks of a river, waving. So instead of asking, I went home that night and I opened up the bank statement I keep in an old cigar box on top of the refrigerator. 31 years of a lineman's pension, a paid-off house, and a life insurance payout from Loretta's policy that I never touched, because spending it felt like spending her. It came to a little over $400,000, sitting there doing nothing but drawing interest and dust. I called the hospital's billing office the next morning. A woman named Sherry answered, patient-voiced, the kind of voice that's had 1,000 hard conversations with scared families and learned somewhere along the way to sound calm without sounding cold. I told her I wanted to set up an account tied to my grandson's patient file that would quietly absorb whatever the insurance didn't cover. Can I ask what's motivating that, Mr. Cobb? She said. Not to talk you out of it, just so I set it up right. My son's proud, I told her. Prouder than he ought to be sometimes, but I understand it. Because it's mine too, just aimed a different direction. If he finds out his old man's covering what he can't, it'll sit on him like a stone. I'd rather he never have to carry that particular stone. He's got enough. And your daughter-in-law? Same reasoning, mostly. Different flavor. She's the type that needs to feel like she's got both hands on the wheel at all times. Finding out there's a whole account she doesn't control. Feeding money into her son's care. I don't know how she'd take that. I'd just as soon not find out unless I have to. Sherry was quiet a second, and then she said something that stuck with me the whole 14 months that followed. You'd be surprised how many grandparents call me asking to do exactly this. Most of them say almost your exact words. Y'all think you're being sneaky. Really, you're just being fathers a second time around. Quieter than the first time, is all. We set it up that morning. An automatic authorization, my account on file, monthly statements mailed only to my address, nothing forwarded, nothing flagged. I told her to call my cell for anything urgent, day or night, and over the following months she did, a handful of times, always with the same steady voice, always careful never to say more than she needed to, if anyone besides me might be listening on my end. Why anonymous? She asked me once. Because if my son finds out I'm covering it, I told her, he'll feel like less of a father, and he's not less of anything. He's just having a hard year. I want to be honest here. Some of it wasn't only for Danny's pride. Some of it was for mine, too. I'd spent so many years being the quiet one at the edges of that family, the one who showed up with squash and fixed the leaky faucet, and got a Christmas card mailed to him instead of an invitation to open presents in person. Paying for Eli in secret let me matter to that boy's life in a way nobody could take credit for, argue about, or shrink down. It was, in its own strange way, the loudest thing I'd ever done. Nobody just heard it. Over the following weeks, I watched the family from the outside the way I always had. Sunday dinners where Vanessa ran the conversation like a meeting agenda. Casseroles rotated with military precision. Danny nodding along to things I could tell he didn't fully agree with. Eli occasionally sneaking over to sit next to me because, he told me once, "You don't make me finish everything on my plate before dessert, Papaw." I remember one particular Sunday in September, clear as anything. Vanessa had made a pot roast, and halfway through the meal she started going down a list. Not out loud exactly, more like thinking out loud in a way that didn't leave room for anybody else's opinion. Eli's specialist moved to Thursdays, so I'll need to shift my Tuesday call to make the drive. And Danny, you'll need to take the Friday pickup since I've got the Henderson audit due. Danny just nodded, fork moving, eyes on his plate. I watched him nod at 3 more things in a row without once being asked whether any of it worked for him. You got a preference in any of that, son? I asked him, plain, into the pause after she finished. Danny looked up like I'd asked something dangerous. It's fine, Dad. Vanessa's got the schedule figured better than I would. I didn't ask if it was fine. I asked if you had a preference. Vanessa's eyes flicked to me. Not unkind exactly. More like she was recalibrating something. He can speak for himself, Walt, she said, which was true, and also not really an answer to what I'd noticed, which was that lately he mostly didn't. Danny changed the subject to the Vols' chances that season, and I let it go, the way I let most things go back then. I've thought since that maybe I let too many things go too easily, for too many years, and calling it respecting people's business was sometimes just another word for staying quiet, when quiet wasn't doing anybody any good. I noticed things. Vanessa had started referring to hospital visits as my scheduling nightmare instead of Eli's appointment. She'd taken to speaking for Danny in front of doctors, cutting him off mid-sentence to correct a detail, waving off a nurse's question directed at him with her own answer instead. Small things. The kind of small things that, stacked up over months, tell you a marriage has quietly reorganized itself so one person holds all the weight of being right. Another time, I'd come by to drop off Eli's booster seat I'd fixed a strap on, and the front door was unlocked the way it usually was, so I let myself into the kitchen without knocking loud. Vanessa was on the phone in the next room, back to the doorway, and I caught the tail end of a conversation with somebody, a sister maybe, or a friend from her old job, before she knew I was there. "I know how it sounds," she was saying, low and fast, "but if I don't handle it, nobody handles it. Danny means well, but if I hand him the checkbook, we're 2 months from a repo notice. I'm not trying to run his life. I'm trying to keep this family from falling in a ditch." A pause, then, quieter. "No, he doesn't know how bad the Eli stuff really is. I don't tell him the real numbers. He'd just, I don't know, shut down. He does that. He gets that quiet thing his dad does, and then I've got 2 useless men in the house instead of 1. I stepped back out onto the porch before she saw me, set the booster seat by the door, and drove home without ever mentioning I'd heard any of it. It wasn't my place to carry tales between a husband and wife, but it sat with me. 2 useless men in the house. I turned that phrase over more nights than I'd like to admit, wondering how much of my own son's silence I'd handed down to him without ever meaning to, the same way you hand down a bad knee or a stubborn streak. One Thursday, I drove Danny and Eli to a cardiology follow-up myself because Vanessa had a work conflict. In the waiting room, Danny finally cracked open, just a little, the way a man does when it's just the 2 of you and a bad vending machine coffee between you. "She thinks I don't understand any of it," he said, staring at the floor. "The billing, the insurance codes, none of it. So she just handles everything and tells me afterward. I used to argue. I don't anymore." "Why not?" I asked. "Because when I do, she reminds me whose credit score is keeping our insurance premiums from doubling. And she's not wrong, Dad. I got laid off for 4 months 2 years back. She's the one who kept this family standing up." I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that a family isn't a company with one CEO. But I understood, sitting there, that Vanessa's control wasn't cruelty, not at first. It was fear wearing armor. She'd grown up, I learned much later, in a house where her own father drank away 2 mortgage payments before her mother finally left him with nothing but boxes and a used car. Vanessa had built her entire adult life as a fortress against ever being that powerless again. I don't excuse what came next, but I understood it. The turning point came on a Tuesday in October. Eli had a bad episode. Chest pain, dizziness, a shortness of breath that turned Danny's face the color of drywall over the phone. I met them at the hospital because I was closer than Vanessa, who was 2 counties away at a conference. By the time she arrived, hours later, wound tight as a fence wire, Eli had already been stabilized, but they wanted to keep him overnight for monitoring, run a new echocardiogram, adjust his medication. That's when the billing office called my cell, right there in the hallway, to confirm authorization on the new charges to the account. I stepped away to take it, the way I always did, careful, quiet, 3 months of practice at being invisible about it. Vanessa saw me on the phone. She didn't hear what was said, but something about my face, or the careful way I answered, "Yes, that's fine. Go ahead and process it the usual way," must have snagged on her, because a few minutes later, back in Eli's room, when the resident doctor was reviewing the new treatment plan, and I asked a simple, ordinary question, whether the medication adjustment might interact with something Eli had reacted to before, that's when it happened. "Just ignore him. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Same moment the story opened on. Except now, you know what was sitting underneath it. 14 months, $400,000, slowly becoming considerably less, a cigar box on top of a refrigerator, a woman named Sherry in a billing office who knew my voice better than some of my own relatives did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up dramatically. I have never in my life found that anger gets a man anywhere worth going. I looked at the doctor, who was still glancing between us, and I said, calm as I could manage, I'm going to ask that question again, because I think it matters, and I'd like an answer. Then I turned to Vanessa, and I said the next part gently, not as a weapon, just as a fact laid down on a table between us. Also, since we're here, I should mention, the account this hospital's been billing to for the last 14 months is mine, not Danny's insurance gap coverage plan. Mine. I set it up in August of last year. Sherry and billing can confirm it if you'd like to call down. The room went very quiet. Danny's head came up slow, like a man surfacing from deep water. Eli, half asleep, didn't notice a thing, which I was grateful for. Vanessa's face did something I hadn't expected. It didn't harden, not right away. It just went blank, the particular blankness of someone doing very fast math on numbers that don't add up the way they thought they did. That's not, she started, then stopped. We have insurance. You have insurance that covers 60%, I said. I've been covering the rest. All of it. Every past due notice, every deductible, every specialist visit that wasn't in network. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want Danny to feel smaller for needing help, and I didn't want you managing one more thing you'd feel like you had to control. But I'm not a man who doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to what's keeping my grandson alive. I've been in this longer than you knew. I want to tell you it was a triumphant moment. It wasn't. Nobody clapped. The doctor mumbled something about giving us privacy and slipped out. Danny sat there with his hands over his face for a long moment, and when he took them away, his eyes were wet, and he just said, "Dad," and nothing else, like the whole rest of the sentence had gotten stuck somewhere behind his teeth. Vanessa didn't yell either. That almost would have been easier. She just sat down slowly in the chair by the window, the one Danny had been slumped in earlier, and stared at the floor tile like it owed her something. 14 months, she said quietly, mostly to herself. 14 months, I confirmed. You let me think we were drowning. You were drowning, I said. I just made sure you never went all the way under. I'm sorry if that feels like I went behind your back. I did go behind your back. I'd make the same choice again, though I'd handle the telling of it different, if I could go back. That was the whole confrontation. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just an old man, a tired daughter-in-law, and a truth that had been sitting quietly in a filing cabinet for over a year, finally stepping out into the light of a hospital room at 10 o'clock at night. The weeks after that were harder than the confrontation itself, in some ways. Confrontations are quick. What follows them is slow. Danny came by my place 3 nights later, alone, and we sat on my porch the way we hadn't sat together in years, not since before Loretta died, back when the 3 of us used to sit out there most evenings while she shelled beans and told us both to quit arguing about football. I should have told you how bad it was, Danny said. I was ashamed. A man's supposed to be able to take care of his own family. Says who? I said. I don't know. Everybody. You did. I had a wife who ran interference for me for 30 years, and a union pension behind me. You had a sick kid, a layoff, and a marriage where you'd stop believing your own opinion counted for much. That's not weakness, son. That's just what happened to you. It could have happened to me too. Different circumstances. He was quiet a long time. Somewhere out past the tree line, a whip poor Will was going at it, the way they do in October evenings before the cold really sets in. I used to be so mad at you, Danny said finally, not looking at me. After Mom died, you went so quiet. I needed you to be loud, I think. I needed you to fall apart so I'd know it was okay if I did too. Instead, you just kept fixing things around the house, like, if you kept your hands busy enough, none of it would catch up to you. That one landed somewhere deep. He wasn't wrong. I've spent a good portion of my life mistaking silence for strength, and I let my own boy grow up thinking his father simply didn't feel things as hard as he did. That's one of my true regrets, and I told him so, plainly, right there on the porch. I felt it, I told him. I just didn't have anybody to show it to after your mother went. I'm sorry you needed that from me, and I couldn't give it. I'm trying now. Might be 30 years late, but I'm trying now. He reached over, at some point in that silence, and put his hand on my shoulder. We didn't hug. Cobb men don't much, but that hand staying there a good long while said what it needed to. A few nights after that, I drove over unannounced, which wasn't like me. and found Vanessa alone at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in numbers, Danny out picking up Eli from a friend's house. She looked up, startled, and for a second I thought about turning around and coming back another time. Instead, I sat down across from her, uninvited, the way you do when you've decided a conversation matters more than manners. "I'm not here to relitigate the hospital," I said. "I just wanted to say something, and then I'll go." She set her pen down, arms crossed, waiting, braced the way people brace when they expect to be lectured. "I watched my own father go quiet on my mother for the better part of 40 years, I told her, which wasn't something I'd said out loud to anybody, not even Loretta, not in those exact words. He didn't drink, didn't run around, wasn't cruel. He just decided somewhere along the way that being the strong one meant never needing anything from anybody, including her. And I think I did some version of that to your husband, without meaning to, just by being the kind of man who fixes the faucet and doesn't talk about what's underneath it. I'm not telling you that to make excuses for what you said in that hospital room. I'm telling you because I think you and I have been doing a similar thing, just wearing different clothes. You control the numbers, so nobody can surprise you with bad news. I control my feelings so nobody can see when I'm scared. Neither one of those is really strength. It's just two different ways of trying not to feel powerless." Vanessa didn't answer right away. She looked down at the legal pad, at columns of numbers that had probably kept her up past midnight more nights than she'd ever tell anyone, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge. "My dad drank 2 mortgage payments before my mom finally left him," she said. "I was 12. We moved into my aunt's basement for a year. I swore I'd never let a family of mine end up somewhere like that again." She looked up at me. "So I count everything, all the time. It's exhausting, Walt. I don't know how to stop." "You don't have to stop," I said. "You just don't have to do it alone anymore. That's the only thing I'm asking. Let some of it be shared weight instead of a wall you're holding up by yourself." She didn't say much after that, but she walked me to the door when I left, which she hadn't done in 9 years, and she said, "Drive safe, Walt," which doesn't sound like much written down, but coming from her that night, it was. Vanessa came around slower, and I don't fault her for that. Pride takes longer to heal than shock does. For the first couple of weeks, she was polite to me, in the way you're polite to a stranger who's done you an unrequested favor. Thank yous that came out clipped. Eye contact that slid away too fast. It was an old friend of mine, Ray Tolliver, who I served alongside on the line crew for 20-some years, and who'd buried a wife of his own, that helped me understand what to do about it. We were fishing off the dock at Norris Lake one Saturday, not saying much, which is mostly how Ray and I fish. The water was flat and gray, cold enough that our breath showed a little 7 Thames, and neither one of us had gotten so much as a nibble in an hour. "You look like a man carrying something," Ray finally said, not looking over, just watching his line the way he always does. I told him the whole thing, the account, the hospital room, the quiet since. Ray listened the way he always has, which is mostly by not saying anything until he's good and ready, and even then, saying less than you'd expect. "You did right by that boy," Ray said, eventually, "but you humiliated her to do it, even if you didn't mean to. I didn't have a choice in that room." "No, maybe not in that room. But you got a choice now, in every room after it. Man like you don't win a family back by being right. You already proved you were right. Now you gotta prove you're kind about it, over and over, longer than feels fair." I asked him how long that usually takes, being a man who'd rebuilt a fair amount in his own life after his Carol passed. "Longer than you want," he said, "shorter than you fear. Somewhere in between, if you don't quit on it." He reeled in a little slack, checked his bait, cast again. "Difference between you and most men, Walt, is you already know how to show up quiet and steady for 30 years running. You did it for that power co-op. You did it for Loretta while she was sick that last year. Don't think I didn't notice. This isn't any different. Just show up. Don't keep score. Eventually they stop bracing for you to leave." Ray's the kind of man who says something like that and then just goes back to watching his bobber, like he hadn't just handed you the next 6 months of your life in 20 seconds. We didn't catch a single fish that whole morning, but I drove home feeling like I'd caught something anyway. So that's what I did. I stopped waiting for gratitude and started just showing up, plain and steady. the same way I'd shown up with squash for years before any of this happened. I started coming by on Wednesday evenings, not to talk about hospital bills or old wounds, just to help Eli with a jigsaw puzzle or sit through part of a cartoon he liked about a talking dog detective. I never brought up Vanessa's comment in that hospital room again, not once. Bringing it back up would have just been me collecting on a debt I'd already decided to forgive. Slowly, she softened toward the edges. One evening in November, she came out onto the porch while I was leaving and stood there a second, arms crossed against the cold, working her jaw like she was deciding whether to say something. "I called Sherry," she said, "in billing. I wanted to see the account myself." "All right," I said. 14 months, like you said. Every payment on time. Nothing late, not once." She looked at me, finally, straight on, for the first time since that night. "I told the doctor to ignore you, and you'd already spent more money keeping my son alive than I'd made in 3 years. That's not the part that matters to me," I said. "The part that matters is you love that boy fierce enough to fight anybody in a room for him, doctor included. I understand that instinct. I don't think less of you for it. I just needed you to know I was fighting the same fight, just from a different corner." She didn't cry, not there on the porch. Vanessa's not a woman who cries in front of people easily, I'd come to learn, but her eyes did that shine they do right before, and she said, quiet, "Thank you, Walt, using my name instead of him or your father, for what I think was the first time in 9 years." By December, small repairs had become a habit rather than an event. Danny started calling me just to talk, not just to coordinate a hospital ride. Vanessa began asking my opinion on things, Eli's diet, a school decision, once even a question about her own late father, sensing correctly, I think, that a man who'd buried a wife might understand something about grief she'd never let herself examine. One Wednesday in early December, Eli handed me a folded piece of construction paper when I came by, serious as a courtroom bailiff delivering a verdict. "Mom said I could give this to you, but only if I made it myself and didn't ask for help with the words." Inside, in a 6-year-old's careful, wandering print, it said, "To Papaw Walt, thank you for my heart. Love, Eli." He'd drawn a heart next to it, colored half red and half blue, which he explained very seriously was because hearts have 2 sides and you have to fix both. I kept that piece of paper folded in my shirt pocket for 2 weeks before I finally put it someplace safe, because for a while, I just liked having it close. Vanessa started leaving a plate for me most Wednesdays, even when I hadn't said I was staying for supper, just set an extra spot without asking, the same unremarkable way Loretta used to. Small as it was, it told me more than any conversation could have, that I wasn't a guest in that house being tolerated anymore. I was just family, the ordinary, everyday kind, the kind that doesn't need an invitation. The real turning point, though, the moment I knew something had genuinely mended rather than just calmed down, came at Thanksgiving. Vanessa always ran that table like a general. Seating charts, a schedule for the turkey down to the minute, a specific fork for a specific course. This year, when I walked in with my usual dish, not squash this time, but Loretta's old sweet potato recipe, the one with the pecans, that I hadn't made since she died because it felt like something that belonged only to her, Vanessa met me at the door and took the dish from my hands. "I saved you the seat at the head of the table," she said, "next to Eli. He asked for you specially. I want to tell you that seat didn't mean much. It meant everything. For 9 years I'd been folded into the corner of that family, useful but peripheral, the man who fixed the faucet and left before dessert. That Thanksgiving, I sat at the head of a table that wasn't even mine, next to a grandson whose heart I'd helped keep beating in more ways than one, and across from a daughter-in-law who raised her glass, halfway through the meal, and said simply, "To Walt, for seeing what none of us wanted to look at." Danny raised his glass too. Eli raised his cup of apple juice, not entirely sure why, just glad to be part of a toast. I didn't say much back. I never do, at moments like that. I just raised my own glass, looked around that table, my son, grown into a good man despite my own quiet failures, a daughter-in-law learning, slow and honest, that strength and control aren't the same thing, a grandson who didn't know yet how many people had fought that hard just to let him grow up ordinary and bored someday, the way children are supposed to get to be. And I thought about Loretta, kneeling in her garden 11 years ago, and I hoped, wherever she was, she could see that the bridge between her boys had finally gotten rebuilt, plank by plank, mostly by people who were still learning how. These days, Eli's doing well. His last 3 checkups have shown real improvement. The doctors are cautiously using words like stable and even, once, thriving, which is about as much celebration as cardiologists allow themselves. I still cover what the insurance doesn't, though it's not a secret anymore. Vanessa handles the household books same as always, but now she calls me in November each year, before the open enrollment period, and asks what I think. Not because she needs my permission, because she wants my opinion. Those are different things, and I've come to understand the difference matters more than almost anything else in a family. Every other Wednesday, I still go by. Eli's gotten good enough at checkers now that he beats me about half the time, fair and square, no letting him win. He started keeping a running tally on a piece of notebook paper taped inside the pantry door. Walt, 14, Eli, 11, and he checks it every visit like it's the most important record in the county. Vanessa usually makes coffee and sits with us a while before she goes back to whatever spreadsheet is open on her laptop. Last week she told me, out of nowhere, stirring her coffee, not looking up, I used to think being strong meant never needing anybody. I think I got that wrong. I told her I'd spent about 40 years thinking silence meant strength, and I'd gotten that wrong too. And maybe most of us spend our whole lives mistaking one thing for the other until somebody finally shows us different. Danny, for his part, has started speaking up more at that table. Small things, an opinion on where to eat, a disagreement about Eli's bedtime, nothing dramatic, just a man remembering the sound of his own voice in his own house. Vanessa lets him finish now. I notice things like that. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I've turned it over plenty of nights on that porch since, it's this. The people who carry the most weight in a family are often the quietest about it, and the people who seem the hardest to reach are usually just the most afraid of being powerless again. Strength doesn't have to announce itself in a courtroom or a hospital hallway. Sometimes it just shows up every Wednesday with a jigsaw puzzle and waits, patient as a season changing, for the people you love to finally let you all the way in. If somebody in your life has been quietly carrying more than you ever gave them credit for, a parent, a grandparent, someone you underestimated because they didn't raise their voice, maybe today's the day you tell them you finally see it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about the quiet ones in your own life, who turned out to be the strongest. And if you've got a father or a papaw like mine, go on and call him tonight. He might not say much back, but he'll hear you. That's usually enough. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.